Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, it's the end of the week here on the Senate floor, and it's my favorite time of the week, and I think it's the Page's favorite time of the week too, because we get to talk about the Alaskan of the Week. And this is a speech that I give every week, and the whole purpose is to talk about somebody in my community, somebody in my great state who has done something really important for their fellow Alaskans, or maybe their fellow Americans. Sometimes it's someone very famous, other times it's somebody who's just working hard every single day, doesn't get a lot of recognition. So what we like to do is come down here and talk about them. We like to brag about them. Now, Mr. President, you know I like to brag about my state. We all like to brag about our states here. You know, when it comes to size and beauty and grandeur and majestic nature, I think Alaska takes the cake of all the other states, but others might disagree. I know the presiding officer loves his state very much, but what we certainly want to encourage people to do is come on up to Alaska, see it for yourselves, spend some time up there. We're getting ready for a little recess. Some of my Senate colleagues are going to be coming up and seeing our great state here in the next week, but I guarantee if you're watching, it's going to be the trip of a lifetime. You'll love it, absolutely love it. But it's really, more important than anything, it's truly the people of Alaska that make it such a special place. So we like to celebrate these people. They're individualistic, rugged, tough, but very community-oriented. And we call them our Alaskan of the Week. Now, I'm going to break a little rule here on the Alaskan of the Week this week because it's going to be the Alaskans of the Week. Not one, two. Two people who are doing great things, and in many ways are reinforcing each other's great work in Alaska. So, I'm going to talk a little bit, though, about one of the challenges. You know, we like to brag about how wonderful our states are, but let's face it, all states, our great nation, we all have challenges and problems. And one of the ones that a number of us back home in Alaska are focused on is a really big challenge and a really problematic issue in my state, and it's the very high rates of domestic violence and sexual assault we have in Alaska. Some of the highest rates in the country. This is a horrible thing, and it impacts families and, of course, victims and survivors. Of course, it's not just a problem in Alaska, it's a problem all across the country. But in Alaska, it is an acute problem. It is a big problem. The good news, Mr. President, is we have hundreds, if not thousands of people in Alaska who have recognized this is a big problem and have banded together and using their energy and creativity and drive have turned to the survivors of this abuse and turned to help them and help them break out of what oftentimes is generational violence. Family victims after family victims. So, Mr. President, today I want to recognize two such Alaskans who are literally leading the way on this very important issue of helping the survivors of these heinous crimes. Sitka, Alaska resident Christine Pate, who is the legal director for the Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, and Anchorage resident Nikole Nelson, who is the executive director of Alaska Legal Services. These two women, for decades, have been leading the effort to bring legal services and other services to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault in our state. They work together, they are leaders, they have helped hundreds, if not thousands, of victims and their families. Think about that over the last 20 years. So let's talk about them a little bit. Christine and her work, and she's done a great job with the Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, what we call ANDVSA, which is an umbrella organization for 25 domestic violence and sexual assault programs across the state. Christine is a cum laude graduate of the New York University School of Law. She came to Alaska in 1993, clerked for Sitka Superior Court Judge Larry Zervos, and after that she worked for Alaska Legal Services in Fairbanks and then has been with A&D VSA for 20 years, doing this really, really important work. Her demeanor was once described by a reporter as, quote, Clark Kent-like, which I would agree with, if that means she has superpowers that are used to fight bad guys and help the good guys. Those who know her just call her wonderful, and I certainly would agree with that. At A&D VSA, she directs the Coalition's statewide Civil Legal Services program, which also includes both staff attorneys and approximately 60 active volunteer attorneys, again, to help survivors and victims of these heinous crimes. And she also oversees legal training and technical assistance for program advocates. As a matter of fact, I was home a few months ago and went to one of her training programs. She does a phenomenal job. Nikole Nelson is her compatriot in arms. She made her way to Alaska 20 years ago, fresh out of Willamette University College of Law, and her first job in Alaska, still doing it, was to work for Alaska Legal Services Corporation. She rose up through the ranks, and now she is the director. She, too, in my view, has superpowers, and she channels those powers to serve in the righteous cause of justice for the too many victims in my state who need it and don't have access to an attorney to help them. I cannot stress, Mr. President, how important both the Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault and Alaska Legal Service Corporations are for victims and survivors of these heinous crimes. Now, I've had the opportunity and really the honor of working with both Christine and Nikole and their organizations very closely over the years. Still am a huge supporter of all they do and have watched them year after year doing the great work that they do to stomp out the scourge of domestic violence in our state. Let me tell you a little story of how we all work together. When I was Attorney General of the state, we had a big campaign strategy called the Choose Respect strategy. And one of the elements of that was to get more lawyers to help with victims, to get more lawyers, pro bono attorneys, to come out and help with victims, survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. Think about this, Mr. President. If you're a rapist and an accused rapist, you get a Sixth Amendment right to counsel. That's in our Bill of Rights. If you're the victim, what do you get? You don't get anything. And far too often, the victims don't have any legal representation. They don't know how to use the justice system as a sword and a shield. And what we were trying to do, what Nikole and Christine have been doing for decades, is saying to the survivors and victims, wait a minute, we can get you a lawyer. We can help you. We can empower you. So we held these pro bono legal summits throughout the state of Alaska, and dozens of lawyers came out of the woodwork and said, we will help you. We'll be your sword and shield in the justice system. And that's what they did. That's what we've done. That's what they have continued to do. And this makes a huge difference. As a matter of fact, of all the studies throughout the country on how you change this culture of abuse, one of the most important things that's in every study to do is get victims and survivors an attorney. So that's what they've been doing. And Mr. President, we actually recently took that idea here to the Senate floor in a bill that Senator Heidkamp and I co-sponsored called the Power Act, which would create another layer of pro bono attorneys The idea is to create an army of lawyers by the thousands in America to provide legal services for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. That's passed the Senate, passed the House, came back over here trying to hotline it, and looks like we hit a little glitch today because I can't imagine any senator who doesn't want to do this. So we'll probably get that done as soon as we're back off recess, and that'll help take this idea nationwide. But the leaders in our community in Alaska have been Nikole and Christine. And as I mentioned, there's no simple solutions on this, but when an abused victim is represented by an attorney, their ability to break out of the cycle of violence increases dramatically. Just one study found that 83% of victims represented by an attorney were able to obtain a protective order versus almost 30% of victims without an attorney. But here's the problem. There was a recent report by a national group that focuses on these issues. In 2014, in one day, there was over 10,000 victims who went without services, like legal services. So there's a desperate, desperate need. And Christine and Nikole have been the ones leading the charge. I talk about an army of attorneys to do this kind of pro bono legal work. In Alaska, they're the captains leading this charge. Christine likes to quote one of the advocates that she works with when she talks about her work. She says, quote, "It's so satisfying to see the relief wash over a person's face when they realize that there's an end in sight and they don't have to live like that in a cycle of violence anymore because they have an attorney representing them." Now, Nicole's been traveling the globe with her daughter in the past month thanks to a much-needed sabbatical grant from Alaska's Rasmussen Foundation. So, Nikole, I hope you're having a much-needed rest. But let me end with a quote written by her about the work that Alaska Legal Services provides, the work that she leads in our great state. Quote, "In any given day, the people who come seeking our services may be moms that have been abused by their spouse, oftentimes in front of their children, and they come to us because they do not have the financial means to leave that abuse, and we help them with that. We may have a grandfather who is struggling to care for his grandchildren and fear he is going to lose his home. All of these problems," she says, "there is a civil legal solution. But unlike in criminal cases where a defendant is guaranteed a court-appointed attorney if they cannot afford one, in civil cases, in these kind of domestic violence, in civil action cases, there is no right to an attorney. And what they do is provide it, particularly to victims of these heinous crimes." Christine and Nikole lead organizations that are doing great work, not only in Alaska, but nationwide. Legal Services Corporation does this work, and I'm a big supporter of them here in the Senate. So Christine and Nikole, thank you, both of you, for all the great work you've done over the years. Thanks for your tremendous spirit of generosity and kindness. I know I can thank you on behalf of so many survivors of these crimes that you have helped and their families. And thanks for being our joint Alaskans of the Week this week in the United States Senate. I yield the floor.